The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the QATV staff or board of directors. QATV, in compliance with FCC regulations, is prohibited from exercising control over the content of independent, member-produced public access programming.
Planning Director for the City of Quincy, come on up and give us a welcome. So please find a seat.
They paid. I already got 2 signatures.
Oh, you how many?
2.
Oh, nice.
And I haven't seen your...
Good evening, Dennis Harrington, Planning Director, City of Quincy. I'm here with City Councilor Margaret Forrest, and the Council and I are here to bring the greetings of the City of Quincy to all you people who know more about climate adaptation than I might. But we've been involved in the planning department in this for several years, going back to 2012. And we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to partner with MAPC. I've always enjoyed their staff. They have wonderful people working in MAPC, and they do outstanding work on behalf of all the communities within the district. More importantly, they've supported the City of Quincy in many planning efforts over the past few years, and we do appreciate the level of the work, the skill sets they bring, and their enthusiasm for helping the City of Quincy. We're here tonight to kick off climate adaptation in the City of Quincy. At our last meeting of the MAPC Executive Board, we voted to make it part of the Metro Future Plan. MAPC has adopted it as part of its Metro Future Plan, and it's extremely important to the entire MAPC district, but most important to the low-lying and coastal communities. Councilor Forrest has had the distinction of representing most of the coastline, or good or bad, in the City of Quincy, and has spent a lot of time working with many, many issues that have to do with climate adaptation and the protection of residential property. Councilor?
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. It's a big shout out to our planning department staff who puts in such tremendous effort on working through these projects. The Ward 1 area that I represent is the majority of the city's coastline. And when you think coastal homes, you think $1 million waterfront properties. That's not the coastline in the City of Quincy. We have single-family, owner-occupied homes, most of whom have been homeowners or passed them down from generation to generation. These are your average single-family homes. And the coastal issues and the FEMA flood maps have been a tremendous impact to these homes and to these families and financial burden. So as you look at these issues coastally and globally and what people are dealing with, it's a little bit different than what we're dealing with in Quincy with our homeowners. So I appreciate the MAPC really taking a look at how we can make our improvements to our coastal infrastructure. The Germantown neighborhood that we are in is a peninsula protected in the cove by a lot of marshland. It's rated as a velocity zone in the FEMA flood maps, and they're saying that's the highest expense in some of the smallest single-family homes in our community. So I appreciate that we're starting here and taking a look at what we can do to make our coastline more resilient and continue the tradition of Quincy families living in these homes for generations and welcoming new people and showing the best-kept secret of Quincy's coastal communities. Thank you.
My final remark is that this session we're going to enjoy this evening will not be the last. There will be another. We have partnered, in addition to MAPC, with Boston University. We appreciate the Boston University component of climate adaptation. And we appreciate the almost as much as we appreciate MAPC giving us $45,000 to do this. So it's all good fun, and we've got a lot of work. So We enjoy the partnership and really appreciate everyone who's here tonight as a concerned individual or a participant. And that's it. John, would you like to come up and say a few words? You're not on the agenda, but you can. John Glenn is our Director of Community Development, and he's at the back of, almost at the back of the hall. Julie, we're passing it to you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you all again for being here. This is really a great turnout, and I really appreciate you coming out, especially on Earth Day. How many folks knew that today was Earth Day? Raise your hands. Yay! I'm so glad, because I wanted just to share in that light that a lot of what we're trying to talk to you about is on a positive note. We're really looking at strategies that we feel would be useful to homeowners regardless of what's happening, whether it's coastal flooding, heat impacts or flooding impacts. So what I plan to do tonight is to give you just a bit of a sense of what we're doing here in Quincy. And in addition to that, to also talk about how we're doing this on the regional scale. So this project is a really important project to us. This is a pilot for us in terms of our work in an urban and coastal environment. It's built, as Dennis said, off of the regional climate strategy that we have put together and that has recently been approved by our council at MAPC for the entire region. So a lot of the work that we're going to be doing with you are things that we've sort of looked at for a long time, looked at over the past couple of years, and we want to narrow down some of these strategies and determine what could work for you here. And also, if I hadn't said, I'm Julie Conroy. I'm the Senior Environmental Planner at MAPC. We have a staff of 4 at this point, and our agency has a staff in its entirety of 70 to 80. And I'd like to also acknowledge Martin Pillsbury, who is my boss, our planning director, and all of our staff. I'll introduce them at some point. We're all going to work together as we move forward in the agenda, so I'll introduce everyone as we go along. So just a couple of sort of orientation slides to get you to understand where we all are. This is our entire region, 101 cities and towns, and Quincy is one of them. And Quincy, in my mind, is one of the more important communities that we can work in because, again, as I've said, we have a lot of really complex but really interesting issues here that we want to work with you on. We've worked with the City of Boston, and clearly as a really built out urbanized environment, there are a lot of different strategies that we'll be looking at. But what's interesting here is that you have a lot of natural environmental areas that we feel are still protective of your residential and businesses. So one of the first things that we did with the strategy is we tried to look at vulnerabilities in multi-different ways throughout the region. So for example, with 101 cities and towns, it's not easy to try to figure out exactly, okay, what every single neighborhood in all of our cities and towns are going to have any flooding impacts or heat impacts. Rather, what we did was we looked at the different community types. So for example, ultra-urban, suburban, rural, what types of impacts may occur there, whether it's within the natural environment or the built environment or the coastal zone, if that isn't the case. And then we also looked a little bit more deeply at the coastal zone versus inland areas, so areas that have a river system and what precipitation and flooding impacts there would be there. So I want to show you just a couple. I've been to so many different presentations where there's a lot of sort of doomsday slides, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible, this is really bad impacts. That's not what we want to show here. Yes, there will be impacts. Yes, there are sea level rise, heat impacts, precipitation, etc. But it's just a different way of living. It's just sort of how do we change our viewpoint in, with regard to our climate. And, there will be impacts, but we will be able to address them. But a couple of things that are very relevant to Quincy I do want to point out, which is that in terms of sea level rise, because of the fact that you have such an expansive coastline, we wanted to look at relative sea level rise projections, and we did so using information from the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management and also their information that they received from the International Panel on Climate Change. They did an analysis that looked at the greater Boston Harbor area, so what we'd be looking at in different scenarios. So as shown here, they had looked at a high emission, so greenhouse gas emissions, the high scenario and a lower scenario, and that's what these different lines are showing. And so, in a nutshell, we are looking at a rise of sea level from anywhere from 1 foot to 6 feet over the course of the next 100 years. So essentially, there are different sort of measuring points by which we can have different adaptation strategies within those time frames. And then also the other thing to note is that not only are we looking at sea level rise and wave action and coastal storm action, but there will be more intense precipitation events. Not necessarily more of them, but their length and their intensity. And as this is showing, the Northeast in general we're really looking at the majority of those larger storms and increases in frequency. And this is a storm that was about, I think in 2010, where there was a pretty significant amount of flooding in the city. And I wanted to just show that there's ways that we can address that. It's not a do or die situation. Heat is another element that we'll be addressing through our vulnerability assessment within the city. We've noted that in Massachusetts, there is an increase from an average temperature change since 1970. So approximately 2 to 4 degree throughout each of the seasons, and there is variability in the seasons. So that also causes a lot of public health impacts. Different types of diseases or vector-borne diseases from an increase in heat, and also cardiovascular and respiratory diseases that we're looking at as well. So when we built the strategy, we also brought together, experts in the field in New England and across the country in some respects, and we were looking at a couple of things. First of all, how do we align what we're trying to do in the region and for all our municipalities with what the state is doing? So there is a Massachusetts adaptation report that they are also looking at this point to try and update that. They're bringing groups together to look at that. So how do we align with that planning document and looking at each of these sectors? There had to be a way that we could try to break up all of this information amongst different sectors. So the built environment, natural resources, the coastal zone, your key infrastructure, local government and economy, and human health and welfare are the sort of categories, if you will, of how we broke up the strategy. And our committee, we put together an advisory committee that was also the same group of folks that did the state plan. We came together and thought, okay, well, obviously we have one major overarching goal for the whole region. We want every city and town to be completely resilient. That's not an easy task. It's how do we get there? How can we really put together some very specific objectives that we can then build from those objectives into, very discrete action items? And so that's the meat of this whole entire strategy. So that is what is shown here in our objectives. As Dennis mentioned, it's part of our regional plan, so we had to sort of fold in this entire strategy into the regional plan. And how did we do that? We basically had it built sort of like a layer cake, and a hierarchy here of what the overall, this is the climate strategy itself, and then our sub-strategies and recommendations. And here's really the key elements that I will talk about later on this evening. The adaptation and mitigation strategies that will really make sense for this community, for Quincy, and what can we pull out of what we've done regionally. So, talking about what we want to do tonight and what we plan to do for the city. As Dennis mentioned, we're working with Boston University and with the city. It's starting with their planning department, and hopefully there will be a group put together that comprises of different departments in the city where we can work across sectors, which is very important, as you've noticed with all of the other sectors previous. Again, this is a pilot project for us, so looking at vulnerabilities within this area in the urban inland areas and also along the coast. And then we also want to build from that and create a plan, a resiliency plan that we will be able to prioritize measures that can be done at the neighborhood level and also at the entire citywide scale. One thing to point out here, we all need to work together. Really, it's absolutely critical. What we've learned in working in other communities is that when it comes to climate resiliency, there's transportation issues, there's environmental issues, there's public health issues. We all need to come together and really just talk through what we're doing. For example, there's been so many times that we've worked in communities where they want to put together a public works type of project, maybe it's a roadway repair project, and yet there are real environmental issues in terms of a stream crossing or a culvert that's been undersized, and then you're dealing with additional stormwater and flooding issues. It's how do we talk to each other about the types of projects that are of their priority, but yet we can make sure they're climate resilient. So another thing to note is that as we built the strategy, we thought of one really overarching issue is that we can't think of adaptation. So adaptation meaning, how do we address these impacts? They are happening. We need to look at this in a positive light, think about some good things that will come out of this. What do we do to make some real changes that we're more resilient? But how do we also try to reduce greenhouse gases? They have to come hand in hand. So one of the key principles of the strategy and what we hope to do here in Quincy as well is to look at the sort of your multi-benefits, right? The bang for the buck, all of those terminologies you've heard. The cross sectors of areas where there are both adaptation and mitigation elements. So a lot of these things we've actually worked on with our communities a lot in the past. So looking at smart growth, how do we, build better? I know that I've heard recently that, there's housing projects that are of interest to the city and they will continue. How do you build those projects? How do you make sure that there's green spaces, that they're elevated buildings potentially, but they're safe and they're climate resilient? So it's not necessarily just abandoning what we think we want to do when it comes to our homes and businesses. Also, water and energy conservation is where we get the same bang for the buck, so reduction of greenhouse gases, but also making your communities more resilient. And I'll talk later about the concept of green infrastructure. There's a lot of different types of techniques that can be employed and things that can be done at a homeowner level and also a larger commercial business scale. So that was all I wanted to show, sort of to get us started, to get the conversation going. What I'm going to do later is right before we go into our breakouts, because I really want to hear, we all want to hear from you. We've really been chomping at the bit to just find out what are your perspectives, what are the issues that you're facing, what are your concerns, and what do you want us to look at. And right before I do so, I'm just going to go over a few of the key adaptation concepts that we think could really work here. But for now, as I pause, what I'd like to do is have some of the Boston University students, they did some great work by looking at some specific vulnerabilities in the Germantown neighborhood where we are here to really get us started in thinking about what direction are we headed with this plan. So I'm going to have them come on up, give a few words, and then right from that we're going to go into the adaptation measures and then break out. Any quick questions though before I have them come right over? Just anything clarifying or anything that you want to learn more about the strategy, or we will have more chance to talk. Okay, so why don't you guys come on up? So Tiana, and I'm just going to quickly go over and change it up.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiana Alves, and this is my colleague, Brian Kramer. We're graduate students in the City Planning and Urban Affairs program at Boston University, and we're going to give you a very brief presentation about our contributions to this climate and coastal adaptation initiative for the city of Quincy. So our approach was twofold. We had a larger part of our class was focused on kind of high-level, city-level vulnerabilities, and then Brian and I led a smaller group that was looking at a more smaller scale, neighborhood-level focus, and we decided to pick what we thought was the most vulnerable population in Quincy, which is right here in Germantown. And so our comprehensive assessment was focused around these three main categories: natural and built environments, looking at housing and infrastructure; socioeconomic capacity, such as demographics and education and community engagement; and then the service infrastructure, such as health centers and accessibility to food and supplies and emergency services. After we did our comprehensive assessment, we wanted to get out into the community and to meet the people who live in Germantown and experience some of these vulnerabilities that we're researching. And I think personally it was probably our most enjoyable part of this project so far. And we picked a weekend, our entire class went out there and met some of you folks and asked you some questions to kind of learn more about you and your experiences and to gain some information from you. And so why survey the community in the first place? We want to gain a consensus on the vision for this neighborhood. We want to make sure everyone's on the same page as far as what you want to see for changes in your community. When you do any kind of planning event, you want to include the members of the community because, especially in a climate change plan, where we're planning for people, and that's you. So if we don't involve you, then the plan and the actions that result from this initiative are virtually meaningless. And we also want you to take ownership of the plan that's going to result from all the studies that we're doing. We want to use this as a communication tool to get information from you, to collect important neighborhood data, and finally to maybe potentially identify some community leaders, those people who may want to step up and take a little bit more extra responsibility in those times when you need somebody to take some initiative and kind of lead the effort when you're dealing with the effects of climate change. And so what do we hope to achieve by doing these surveys? We want to increase our awareness and understanding of what your vulnerabilities and needs are. We want to plan for and address these vulnerabilities in the face of climate change. And finally, we want to replicate whatever plans and actions that come out of the neighborhood, the Germantown Neighborhood Study, and replicate that in other neighborhoods of Quincy. And so with that, we want to kind of touch on some of what are the preliminary results of the survey. The survey is still ongoing, and we have cards back there where you can get a link to the survey. You can complete it if you haven't. We really would appreciate it if you do. But I'm going to turn it over to Brian Creamer now, who's going to talk about some of those preliminary results.
Thanks, Jan. Hi, everyone. I wanted to start with giving a kind of broad perspective and not your typical view of Germantown. And I just wanted to point out that we kind of exist here on a really special place between downtown Quincy, House Neck, and two really special bodies of water, and the Broad Meadows Marsh and the Rock Island Cove Salt Marsh. So, and then I wanted to go into a few of the community level and kind of other ways that we're going to help and project our work in the community. So in our survey, we heard a lot of responses that wanted more green space and more trees in the community, and they indicated that they knew and were in support of more green spaces that they could help with ecological impact. We heard a lot of response in support of safe walking or safer walking conditions and helping the pedestrian experience. And one of the ways you can do this is to extend curbs out into the street, and that kind of serves a dual purpose to help the pedestrian have a shorter distance across the street, as well as kind of hold some stormwater in the interim and increasing your surface runoff. In addition to at the curb level and at the intersection level, you can do this on most neighborhood level streets and have a little extra storage capacity so you're reducing your runoff into those bodies of water on either side of us. And then in addition to that, kind of where the pedestrian might not interact with the ocean and our coastline, improving the quality of that coastline and greening it to an extent and increasing the marsh and ecological health of the neighborhood. And then on a community level, increasing our awareness and risk outreach when an event does take place. Beyond the pedestrian scale, we heard a lot of response that residents would like to see more pedestrian walkways, more biking options, and improved transportation options generally. We thought that might be an interesting spot to extend the Sea to Summit Greenway that extends from Howe's Neck all the way up to out here.
Blue Hill.
Blue Hill, yeah, thank you. And we heard over half the respondents to the survey wanted to see greater access and more help to get elderly and more vulnerable residents shelter access during an event. A few of the respondents were vocal and very forthright in that they wanted to see climate education and more of this stuff being brought into the schools and helping children understand where we're headed with this. And again, there was a very vocal outreach and what they wanted to see, a little more communication and outreach from all parties. So, two of the biggest takeaways that we got from our work so far this semester is that it really opened up a great opportunity for us to work with engaged planners and MAPC to get a better perspective on how this is done in the real world. And also, it was really important for us to work in Germantown, where a city's weakest link is oftentimes where its most vulnerable population is. So that's why we wanted to work here. These are ways to contact us in the future and ways to follow our story. And thank you.
I'll take a second here to introduce Councilor Guttrow. Doug Guttrow is a councilor at large. He's a friend of our planning department. We go way back to low-impact development, probably almost 10 years ago, and it's blending in with climate adaptation. So, Councilor Guttrow, if you have any words, come up, and you can have the mic. Again, we appreciate your help, Councilor, and
thank you all. Happy Earth Day to everybody, 45th anniversary of Earth Day. If you don't know, professionally for the past 26 years, I worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and obviously the President proclaimed the single biggest threat facing the globe is climate change. And workshops like this, climate adaptation, are the single most important thing that we could do to plan for extreme weather events, sea level rise, and issues like that. So I'm proud that the planning department of the city of Quincy is taking a leadership role. I mean, I have a front row seat in my profession, in my job, to see what cities and towns are doing that are kind of on the cutting edge of this. And I get to tour with the regional administrator of EPA. And I've been down on the Cape in Barnstable and down in Rhode Island just to learn what many of the communities are doing that are kind of pioneering to protect their citizens, to build coastal resiliency, and to do extraordinary things. So I'm delighted that we've got a coastal resiliency plan. I think there's so many things that we can and should do. I think an urban community like ours that has 94,000 people and 27 miles of coastline must take a leadership role on an issue like this. If you don't plan, you react, and we shouldn't be in a position where we're forced to react. So I hope to participate and engage much more frequently in this matter, because I feel like I have something to lend. So I appreciate the opportunity, Dennis, and I appreciate all the 50 or so folks that are here tonight for coming and learning and participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Quincy.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to get back to talking about a few of our specific strategies and get you ready to have our breakout discussions and just sort of brainstorm a little bit about some of the things that we're thinking about. And it's so wonderful to hear about what you already have described through the survey in the Germantown area. A lot of what you have an interest in are things that we are hopeful that we can try to employ. So I'm going to go over a few concepts just really briefly. First, I'd like to just say that I like to show that picture. It's, one of the things we're trying to convey to folks is that we're just thinking about repurposing. How do we repurpose some of the things that we currently use in a different way? And I think that we could try to go a long way with that and not looking at real costly measures, but things that we can do on a day-to-day basis, and whether that's in your home or in a business scale. So one of the things that we're looking at are obviously looking at resource protection, natural resource protection and zoning. So there are ways that we can build differently, and this is not necessarily what happens in Quincy, where you have subdivisions any longer, but they're just sort of pointing out the situation where just citing different types of whether it's housing or commercial properties and redeveloped areas, making sure that you're taking into account the natural resource buffers first. I mean, that's the first step in being resilient, and then sort of working around those areas that you have. And so there's ways that you can change zoning to make sure that that happens in a whole variety of different scales. So we'll talk about that. The other thing is really trying to be creative and strategic about where you develop. So thinking about, do we want to transfer development rights from one area to another to be protective? If it's a velocity zone and it's an area in which properties have been damaged over time constantly again and again, do you really want to continue to have investments there? Is it an area that we think that we may want to retreat, so to speak, from slightly, by having, maybe that's an area for parks, maybe that's where we target our open space and our green space. And so there's ways that you can have a transfer of that development, and there's density bonuses, if you will, for transferring out of an area where you can redevelop elsewhere. And we can talk a little bit more about that. There's also a couple of really interesting concepts that we're working on. We've been looking at what actually EPA Region 1 is looking into in terms of rolling easements. So this is a concept where sort of an interim step between fully retreating from an area, but looking at what the impacts are and having some measurement for those impacts. I know this is somewhat of a complicated graphic, but basically this is from the Georgetown Center for Law and Policy. They did some work, and then they worked with EPA coming up with an actual full guidance document on this concept, where essentially in areas that, based on science, you can determine there are going to be certain, whether it's in a coastal area, maybe it's sea level rise and wave action and coastal inundation and flooding, or if it's in a river system, it's areas where there are projections, also including precipitation data, where there will be a larger floodplain area. And then there's a zoning change there that says, this is an area where you may want to have some revised zoning where, depending upon that marker, so for example, in a coastal area, if there's certain levels of mean high water that has changed and there's property damage, then maybe that's the first marker where you say that property can no longer, make additions to their structures. It's where a conservation easement, so to speak, comes into place, where the city then works with that property owner to say, we really need to think about how this is going to have continual damage. Maybe over time that does become a situation where that area can no longer be developed. But it's not so direct. It doesn't happen right away. There's some time frames that are put in place. And it's a bit of a complicated issue in terms of how you put this type of program into place, and we're looking at that right now with EPA. But it's a definite concept that has a lot of, I think, a lot of merit. And the other thing too is that, in also your riverine areas, more of your inland areas, you have an option to look at expanding the floodplain, to build into your zoning and regulation these areas based on science again. So based on this is an example from Pierce County in Maryland, I believe, where they had, based on science, looked at including a special flood hazard area and floodway. So based on increased precipitation, so new rainfall data about, where are there going to be these areas where there is increased flooding, where are there areas where the stream bed or the river needs to expand, or there's changes to the banks, or there's areas where there's just need for increased buffers, and that becomes a special flood hazard area. And then there's also, they took a look at a riparian habitat zone, so where are there areas where you have certain types of species, whether it's bushes, trees, whatever that type of species might be, with regard to the type of environment and natural area and natural systems that it includes. Then you put those items together and you come up with your own floodplain zoning. And so within that, you have the opportunity to create regulations that say, you have to have a certain amount of setback within those areas. You need to, have certain types of development or not within those areas, or you have to have certain vegetation. So there's ways that the community can be empowered to do that. And I want to mention that one thing to note is that, we're looking at in the future. We're looking at, 5 years, 10 years, 50, 100 years. So this goes beyond what you've already talked about in your community with regard to the FEMA flood maps. And it's important to really think that way, because those maps are looking at historical data and what is happening today. It's not looking at what's happening in 10 years, not looking at what's happening in 20, never mind 50. So, you really want to sort of be proactive about this. There are going to be these areas that need to change, and they need to expand. And one thing that we've found is that if a community is part of the community rating, if they're within the National Flood Insurance Program and they're part of the community rating system, that community can receive credits for doing this above and beyond work from FEMA. So also there could be a reduction in insurance for property owners. And the other thing is, again, looking at these particular rules and regulations. So if you've made these changes and you want to be more protective and proactive, you can create these additional setback areas. This is actually something that was done in Maine at the state scale. So every community within the state of Maine has to abide by the state shoreline protection rules. And therefore, at each community level, you have a setback area that's, whether it's inland or coastal, with regard to certain hazard areas, if you will, or shoreline areas. And this is just a diagram showing a couple of standards, if you will, for where you can and can't build, vegetated areas that they need to have. This is actually showing a property where it was relocated based on that measure of high water mark. So it's really creating these resource protection districts, so looking at ways that you can use your natural environment to protect yourself, your properties. Then also, this is work that we've done. This is an interesting work in Hull where we looked at creating a zoning overlay. This was a project that the community came in to talk about economic development and, how do they create a sort of a downtown sort of commercial district. And we said, hold on, that whole entire district isn't within a velocity zone. You're planning for economic investments and economic development that will have damage. It will. just based on historic record. So they were open to the fact of, let's see if we can create a zoning overlay where we can have certain building guidelines with regard to, let's create this first floor where it's sort of an open space, if you will, or temporary uses where if there is going to be flood inundation, then that is an area that can flood and there won't be a lot of property damage. I mean, all of the infrastructure was placed on a different floor or up on the roof. The design of the building is also energy efficient, so they have some guidelines with regard to that. And it just becomes far more resilient, yet it's also an economic development strategy. The other thing is just, again, as I mentioned, ways that we can try to keep our interests, and if development is important, redevelopment is important in different areas, on how can we build smarter. So this is, clearly elevating, and again, getting back to a reduction in flood insurance just by having an elevation of 3 feet is something that this came directly out of FEMA's credits for higher regulatory standards, something the community should think about. And then I talked briefly before about green infrastructure. There's a lot of different ways to think about green infrastructure, and I won't get into all those. I want to hear from you about what your thoughts are about it. But just sort of getting a sense of what's the difference between our gray infrastructure and what would green be. It would be, multifunctional, and it would have a lot of different benefits. And there would be a way that you can create maintain that hydrologic cycle here instead of taking your stormwater and pumping it away or pumping it somewhere else that it would be detrimental. And this is actually, I found this right from the Town Brook Enhancement Project. So a lot of the types of green infrastructure elements that we're thinking about are things that the city is already sort of planning for. And this was a really interesting graphic. This was from the city of Philadelphia showing one of their really dense areas, but yet it's a rendering of what different types of green infrastructure would look like if a lot of they have a green infrastructure guidelines document. What would it look like if a lot of those things were employed? I think it looks pretty good to me. And then thinking about our vulnerable population, so where are there folks who are within a floodplain or within a type of building stock where there's no air conditioning? Where are there folks who have a lot of additional vulnerabilities when it comes to climate impacts? We really need to prioritize those types of areas and do something about them. Create weatherized buildings, energy efficiency, and have air conditioning and heat protections. Those should be equitable elements across the city. And then thinking about, again, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water elements, there are ways that we can really think about water reuse and conservation when we are working on projects all together. So don't just think about, what can we do at the streetscape, but if we're doing a redevelopment project or even improvements to a residential, can there be a way that we can reuse? We can do a lot of different things. Rain gardens are one element of green infrastructure that recharge stormwater, but then there's also rain barrels, so taking that and you can have it at a different scale and reusing water. So I'm going to end here because now it's your turn. And I want this to be hopefully a positive exercise. What we want to do, and I'm going to have Rob Stevens come up from the city, Quincy Planning Department, and Rob's my partner in crime on this here. So I wanted Rob to have an opportunity to give the perspective from the city about what do we want to do in these discussions, and then just have at it, have you go over to the tables and do that. So Rob, do you want to give a few words on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you everybody for showing up. Happy Earth Day. This is really exciting. This has been a number of years in the making for us, getting to this point where we can, finally engage the public. I look at it as the timing, is right now. I think we've seen an awful lot of storms here recently in our community and throughout our state that are, letting us know that, we're going to expect a lot more rain, a lot more blizzards, hopefully not 3 in a row again. But, you look at a tornado in Springfield. So I had a chance to work on the city's existing hazard mitigation plan. That's a 5-year plan. I think Captain Rich Bryan here and some other members of that working group. We will reconvene that working group to help with this coastal adaptation, but what it really is the hazard mitigation plan, as I think Julie mentioned with the FEMA maps, looks backwards to figure out our situation today. This effort is going to allow us to project forward and try to start to implement things today. We're already doing a lot. We're doing a lot of seawall repair. Julie didn't get into some of those types of things. What do we do with our coast? Not necessarily our residential homes, but do we abandon areas? I think there are communities down the Cape where you can no longer build right on the water anymore. That's what that community talked about. So I thought it would be great as we're starting this initiative, this discussion over the next 12 months, to hear from the public. We want to hear stories about your neighborhoods, with the storms, with the oceans, with the streams. I had the opportunity to work on the Townbrook relocation project. It was great that you put up the park graphic up there. We're looking to hopefully do a environmental treasures walk there this summer, but we did include some rain garden areas, and we tried to reintroduce some of the native plants into that brook. We have some work to do because the invasives keep coming in, but we were able to add some environmental engineering to that public infrastructure project, and I think it's something with an existing coastal adaptation plan that'll augment the city's hazard mitigation plan. That'll help give us some guides moving forward on from the city's perspective on a lot of the big public improvement projects we're working on. But it also will have a real-world benefit to individual businesses and homeowners, which I think a lot of you are. So I believe we're doing 3 sessions.
Yeah.
There'll be a member from the city and MAPC at each table to help the discussion. I think we have the tables spread out through here. So I'd encourage you all to get up and pick a table, and let's hear what you have to say. I'm sorry, we got a question over here. Sure. Couple questions. Go right ahead.
You referred a few times to scientists and experts. Who are these experts?
Well, there's lots of them.
Well, who are some of them? I mean, I've heard experts saying there's no such thing as climate change.
People with higher degrees than you, Don. Right. Well, I don't really want to be here to argue the science of this. We have 27 miles of coastline. Yep, but we have 27 miles of coastline today.
I understand that.
And we have storms today. We really want to look at what our vulnerabilities
If
are.
you've gone this far with this presentation, I mean, you must have somebody you can refer to that's giving you all this information.
Thousands and thousands of scientists and hundreds of years of data, and lots of computer simulations that don't show anything else, but you have nothing to counter it.
Right.
You don't come here with anything except for show me the data. And if somebody actually shows you data, you're going to sit there and say, oh, I don't understand it.
This is true and nothing else is. This is true. This is the truth and nobody else is telling the truth.
So
Joe Pastati.
In order to answer your question.
One of the largest in the country say there's no such thing as global change or climate
Right.
change. So
And
he's
is
wrong.
he a scientist?
They're right. Yes, he is.
So in order to answer your question, so we can make sure we hear from everybody, just to give you a flavor, we've worked with all of the academic institutions in Massachusetts and throughout New England, and also a lot of the data that we have has come from the International Panel of Climate Change.
Wasn't it caught lying about the statistics a few years back?
So I can't speak to anything specific on that note, but what I can say is that not only have we looked at this internationally, nationally, but regionally and locally. We have a lot of really very thoughtful partners at the state, at the academic institutions that have really looked at this. Boston University, Tufts University, UMass Boston and the other UMass campuses have worked really hard on this. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, Woods Hole group, a lot of consulting firms that we're working, that folks here, Woodard and Curran, a lot of different organizations across New England. I wouldn't even have the time to list them all out. But I will say, I'm happy to talk more directly with you about it, to give you some sense.
Question, I think it's very easy.
Can I throw out
So-
one thing? And Faye is, on January 13th this year, Stephen Young from Salem State came and gave a very in-depth presentation on global warming and the climate adaptation and all the other issues. If you went to that, you would have heard what some of his scientific sources are and some of the science that he has generated. There are thousands of people like him doing it. We had one in Quincy. So there's an example.
Happy to provide that to you, sure. Any other things before we break? Yes?
99% of the scientists believe in man-made climate change. I think that means something. If you want to believe, there are
Don, if you
people...
want to argue climate change, go somewhere else. We're talking
Why?
about the issues that are
Why?
facing Quincy right now. These are
You can
realities.
science-
See that link up there,
You
Don? Go
can see
download
it.
those drawings. Look at whose name is on the drawings, Don. You want to know who did it? Look at whose name is on the drawings, Don. If you want to know who did it, look at the names on the drawings.
I think that we should probably, just so everybody has a chance to talk, why don't we, again, if there's further questions, please ask us offline. We're going to break into our groups now. I want to encourage people to think about, we've got different impacts and different information at each of the three tables. Heat impacts over here. We're looking at flood impacts over there, whether it's inland or coastal, and then more of the specific coastal impacts over to the back corner.
Instead of silencing me for a minute, let me just explain where I'm coming from.
So I think that we should, if everybody could pick a location, stretch your legs, get some food, and then we'll reconvene back in about 20 or so minutes so that we can get your perspectives. There will be facilitators in each group, and they'll guide you through, the conversation.
Just fell off the...
Tub in the toilet. My name is Joe King, and I do some of the flood map work and infrastructure work in the city. I work for a firm named Woodard.
I'm Brennan. I'm just a Quincy resident. I live in the Featured Dell area, and I'm part of Quincy Making Waves Coalition. I'm a Quincy resident. I've been resident most of my life. I have been involved in local environmental efforts. I look like I'm doing pretty good. I'm close to my neighbors get flooding right now. And I'm Sally Owen. I'm a Quincy resident as well. I'm a new Quincy resident, have a background in city planning. I graduated from the program of city planning. I took too long ago to Metropolitan.
I also did a video a long time ago. I'm still a nurse, then a couple more in the 60s. I work on Riviera Road. I showed
Okay, great. Would you like to say anything?
Yeah. My name is Kelly. I actually work for the city as the Energy and Sustainability Director, and I'm not in the planning department, but
Sadly.
What?
Sadly.
I work in public buildings, but we work very closely with each other on climate issues.
Okay. Yeah. Would you ladies introduce yourselves?
Yeah, well, I'm Ainoa, and I'm Laura, and we go to Boston University. We've been working on... Wait, yeah, I'm Kara, and I work for the Planning Council.
It's like employment oasis, right? So residential. And, interesting sea level rise. Really being near. That's kind of like, right, and you have such great soft infrastructure protecting, particularly this area. They're like, that's totally not my business. I mean, so many other coastal things.
You're right, so it's inundated, so it's misleading.
Well, there are some members of the planning board here tonight, and I don't know if after we finish up.
No, actually, they have all, this is how the rest of them, now that we're changing the FEMA maps, they're probably gonna roll them back. So it's like, I think it's like 16 feet, it's outrageous, so the Glossies are, this is all the small bungalows.
There's Liz Manning.
The Glossies are good.
Hi, how are you doing?
All the houses with a lot of houses with tore down recommendation and all the clerks.
Yeah.
Those are the areas that get hot when it's summer. Probably gets hotter here. Because you don't have shade. And then, this is Yes.
We don't have trees and bushes and shrubs and things growing in there, so this remains a wetlands, which means a storage for water to run off for storm events. And every time I go back by there, high tide, that gate is closed. Because someone on this end has a little stream that goes through their backyard that's about 3 inches lower than their first floor. So if they actually open this floodgate over here, that person's house is going to get flooded. But when they did the work over here, and they did all this restoration work, and they did the work to bring that pipe back through, they never bothered to unplug the thing at the guy's house. It's got concrete in it that keeps water from flowing into the marsh. There's, all of the neighbors in this area are aware of this. Every one of us. This is out on Spring Street in Homestead. I mean, if you want this stuff taken care of, when you see this stuff going on and it doesn't make sense, call your counselor and ask them what the hell they're doing. Why are they voting for this stuff? Call the mayor and ask them what they're doing. Why are they allowing this stuff to happen? That's the biggest problem we have in Quincy, is they're just rolling over.
Flooding of property is a primary concern.
Flooding a property is a primary concern. Yeah, well, no. Flooding a property is a primary concern. However, in a situation like this, where you have an area that is actually being impacted by not being allowed to flood and is not allowed to contain that water and protect the other homes around it because of one home there, then that's the time for the city to come in by eminent domain and take that home and make that a water course.
Don't yell at me.
So
we have.
What Carl was saying is that, we're very densely populated area, and they're constantly building. In fact, there was a time when people here in Louisiana wanted to take over all of their land in the city. Some zoning ordinances only take over a certain percentage.
Sally, outdoor voice, come on.
What's that?
I can't hear you. Outdoor voice, please.
I'm talking about take the zoning ordinance that would allow, you couldn't pave over all your property.
Yeah,
There was
yeah.
like, because there's
It's part of the Mass Wetlands Ordinance.
well, no, there was something more recently, because like
Okay.
a lot of people were coming in and they were
Yeah.
paving their whole yard.
Yes, yeah, no, you're right, yeah.
But the reality is that, anytime someone builds a new property or whatever, they're taking they're destroying some permeability, and I don't know.
I can't agree with that. I mean, if you go to the Conservation Commission, they're constantly reviewing that,
But if you could locate areas of interest to you, areas that you think are particularly vulnerable, and feel free to write down. Feel free to write down some of your ideas of what adaptation strategies we can begin to think about for this project.
It's interesting that Germantown is housing is a major modernization, whether it's like windows, roofs, envelope, all of the housing
housing project. So now they have a lot of interior work that really needs to be done, but they've done a lot of improvement. It's a significant investment in this area, but it's like, why don't you finish that? So when you talk about things like parking and green space and, I mean, funding, I guess, is not, but I feel like impactful. You talk about an area with the socially vulnerable population, right? It's residential housing, all low income. That's the area to be. I think, is there funding coming through to implement some of your strategies? Or
I feel like there's funding attached to things like impervious surfaces and efforts to make the city greener. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I feel like I've seen them for attached to grants. But I think that goes to the question that you were saying, we're facing this in the future, what's our solution for improving it? And so it sounds like one of them is reduce the number or the amount of impervious surface, right? Okay.
Hemp and a lime mortar. And these buildings are very strong, they're wind resistant, they absorb CO2, and they don't transmit, like they're not conduits for thermal energy. So it actually has a cooling effect on the building. You don't have
These
to
are
have,
hemp buildings?
Yeah, hempcrete.
Okay.
Hempcrete, like concrete, but with hemp. So it's extremely green, it's extremely sustainable. It absorbs CO2, they're strong and wind resistant, easy to grow, reduce heat in the area.
See, okay, you're built on a floodplain. It's now time to get on. Will all residences have this be as aid in helping us reclaim our beaches? Well, that's a big question. Oh, yeah. And I think
So that, I think, is a solution that I would love to see.
They're going to pay us to build I'm sure they're going to get a job for that. Oh, and I hope so. And then that's what happens,
Okay, folks, if we could all come back into our seats, please. We're going to have a few minutes to hear from you, learn what you talked about. So if everyone could come on back to their seats, please. We'll give you a minute or two to get over. Okay, if everyone could come on back to their seats, please, and we'll have a chance to all talk together. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So what we would like to do now is hear from you. So we thought what we could do is I'm going to have Rob facilitate this, but it would be nice if folks from each group might be willing to say their observations. We can have that led by our facilitators, so I'm going to ask Heidi, Eliza, and Martin to be on hand. But I'd love it if there were folks from each of the groups, whether you're talking about looking at heat impacts, flood impacts, or coastal impacts, coastal sea level rise. Is there anything that folks want to start? Just making observations with regard to their concerns or some suggestions. So I'm going to start with the heat impact group. Who was in that group and willing to say anything? If not, I'm going to have to ask. Yes. James.
Well, there was a lot addressed. I took some notes. Off the top of my head, I'm not very...
Do we need to bring the mic over?
I can speak louder, so I...
Okay. You want to come on over here? Thank you.
It's a very good discussion. She always gets the best information from people you don't know. Heidi, what we discussed, impervious surfaces, where heat is trapped, how it is concentrated. We feel that it's important to identify vulnerable populations, mainly the K through 12 and the senior populations. Let's see here. Yeah, and we basically just broke out and asked people what their observations. And we came up with stormwater runoff, natural resource adaptation strategies was popular, and green infrastructure that would help absorb some of these impacts. We had Margaret LaForest. She was very knowledgeable with the shoreline connections. She discussed a plan that had, she's kind of comparing a plan they once had where they planted 100 trees and how that sort of mind frame would sort of play into other facets, whether it be transportation, like she discussed a boardwalk. It's not really a boardwalk, but it's supposed to look like one. In any event, it's sort of a beautification and that sort of solves two problems at once. We also had, she also said that the stakeholders are very important. Tenants associations, community activists, elected officials, and I think that's probably one of the most impactful statements. And you have to remember your stakeholders, who they might be. We heard from Ross Edwards, who lives near the Marymount School. He is the gentleman with the, here we go right there, the solar panels, and it was interesting, protection of natural resources. Also the heat problems that have to do with not having available air conditioning in some of the older dwellings, especially for elderly populations. And what do they do about that? I mean, are there places where they can go? And if there are, how do they get there? So, I mean, this is pretty much it. We had, oh wait, if I could address one more. Rachel, who has lived here for a few months, she's looking to buy a home. She has environmental concerns, and she talked about different things that you might be able to employ, such as hempcrete, which is a building material that would be pest resistant, mold resistant, and less impactful on the environment. So that's heat.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. That's a lot of really important observations. Any thoughts? Anybody else had any concerns or things that they wanted to talk about? Don't be shy. This is our chance to hear from you. If not, we'll pause for a moment and move on to the coastal group. Anybody in that group? How many people were in? I'm gonna put you on the spot. How many people were in the coastal group? Raise their hands. Raise them up. Okay. Is there anyone who'd like to just make one, important observation or raise a concern? If not, I'm going to probably turn it over to our leaders who took your notes. Anyone? Coastal? Brian, were you in that group? Were you taking notes? Eliza? Anything of note?
Well, actually, let me grab the notes.
Okay.
All right, so I will glance at the notes just to make sure I'm not leaving out important things. So we heard a lot. I heard a lot from a lot of different people about surrounding communication, and a lot of what people were concerned about was making sure anybody from my group want to step in and clarify anything?
It was also addressed issues on flooding.
Flooding, yes.
Yeah. Particularly near the Finishbook Parkway.
Okay.
And the water runoff and the development that has taken place up on the hilltop, and how some of that has had an effect.
Yes.
And so the area council has been working very closely with the people such as Mass Highway Department, because they start almost part of the Finishbook Parkway, etc. So it's not under Quincy's jurisdiction. So there are issues, Town Brook, the area of marshland behind Lincoln Haycock School, those are areas that are apt to flood. And that's why we call it Water Street, because it used to be underwater.
Yeah, so a lot of concerns about stormwater management and making sure that future development takes that into account and minimizes that kind of runoff and local flooding that folks are seeing as a concern.
Also, on the communication side, getting this stuff into the schools locally, I think is going to be huge. I was explaining the kids in my neighborhood think that the marshes are to ride your ATVs in. And so there could be so much more if we're talking about, 50 years from now, getting this, formally introduced into the schools, I think will be a big win.
Oh, yeah. Piggybacking off of that, as we're talking about natural resources and utilizing green spaces in the community, those would be excellent field trips for schools where kids can go out, learn about the wildlife. And perhaps there's a community garden where they can learn a little bit about how to grow their own food, or how to take care of a piece of land, or how to prune a tree. Those are all very valuable life skills that can be contributed to the future generation.
Yes, definitely. I think I saw another hand. Yes.
Oh, there's also the part of the communication is finding out more about the compressor station that's being proposed for Weymouth, which will impact Germantown and South Quincy, and also taking into account when you plant trees, whether there are gas leaks there that need to be fixed before the trees are planted, because otherwise they're just going to die and it'll be a waste of energy.
So not just stormwater, but also utilities.
Right. So, and now clearly it sounds like looking at what's happening in the neighboring communities as well, neighboring municipalities, to make sure that you're working together. So that's it sounds like a current project, and yeah. Okay. Anyone else, any observations? Or, yes, I'm sorry? Yes? I think it sounds like everybody can hear. Let me know but please.
We're talking about wetlands and the environment. I'm coming from a place where I grew up since 1952 in Housenet, looking at Raccoon Island most of my life. I remember back in the 50s, we didn't have any problems. I remember back in the 60s, we hardly had any problems. I do remember in the 70s, when the city of Quincy, and I'm sure other communities did too, started allowing everyone to build on the marshes and didn't keep the upkeep of the floodgates, okay? And then they came along, and I'll always remember going to the meeting at the community center down there in House Neck. This gentleman came in, and they were going to change the front of Edgewater Drive. They were going to take all these creeks and everything, and they were going to make it a nice beach. Well, they made it a beautiful beach. They took all of the marshland out of there. It's all covered in sand. Every once in a while, if you go down there, you see Mother Nature try to take it back, but the city never allows Mother Nature to have what she used to own. All right? But I remember that. And I remember the discussions by old timers that were my age back then, saying this is the wrong thing to do. They took and they put a small little pipe, okay, they call it an outflow pipe, to take the place of all of those marshes. All right? So when you talk about this stuff, you got to talk about, you're allowing these people, or they were at this time, they're allowing these people to build down there. They're allowing these people to fill in land and build their houses this high up, so that everybody around them was getting flooded. It's not a climate change, okay? It's not a global change or anything else. It's the fact that for years, in order to get some more revenue, the city allowed people to build anywhere they want, and they never took care of the floodgates. Since the city's taken care of the floodgates, since the city has come down, Mayor Cole, since he's come down, and he put that new outflow pipe in, he made it a lot bigger, and he put the holding tank in there, 5 years, I've had no water in my cellar, all right? So it's not all this stuff about all this global change. I mean, it's the fact that you've taken the environment and you've allowed people to put all kinds of buildings and everything else on it, and now you want to blame so-called climate change. All it is Mother Nature, some of downtown Boston, other places where they filled it since the 1700s, Mother Nature saying, I want it back. And they have to keep filling it in in order to keep it looking nice. I'd rather have a rotten-looking beach like we did back then and not have water running through all the cellars that are down there and everything else like that. So this global warming thing and this climate change thing, I just don't buy. I buy the fact of, since 1952, experience looking at what's been going on down there, what's been going on in the city. You didn't have those problems until you started allowing these people to come in and start building down there and all this other stuff down there with homes and everything else, right in the marshes.
So
There's your problem.
I hear you, and we might need to have you come to some of the other meetings that we have, because you have made very valid points. Whether you're talking about climate change or not,
there's no such thing as climate change. Coastal wetlands are a very
dynamic system, and I've worked on coastal wetlands for years and worked in HouseNet and understand exactly what you're talking about. We need to make sure that people understand that that is the most protective element within this type of area.
You don't have to
It doesn't get any better than
Climate
that.
change is just gone.
I'm talking to the lady.
But I don't hear what you're saying.
You don't have to change it.
Right.
You just gotta leave it alone.
It's to
And
make
let Mother
sure,
Nature have it
and they
back.
will
She's bothering
migrate.
us.
As you know, they will migrate. They will try to expand, so you're right. You're right.
Well, if I'm right, then there's no
So-
such thing as climate change, right?
Well, I don't know about
Wait,
that.
no, you said I was right. You said I was
Later.
right. I'm glad you said that.
So that is a really important element about when it comes to coastal impacts and, for people to think about. Anybody else want to raise an issue or observation about that? I mean, I know it's definitely a true situation. There's a lot of, conflicts and very close proximity between developed and natural areas like coastal wetlands. Something for us to really think about. Yes?
I'm curious about the building of the downtown, because I don't know all that much about it, but I've been told that because it's not in a flood zone, we're not taking into consideration all this idea of building it so that it could flood. It may not be in a flood zone now, but if FEMA has its way, it will be in a flood zone next week. So I'm wondering, can anybody here answer what is going on with downtown as far as are they building for flood?
I'm going to have to look to Robin for that, but what I will say is, from our perspective, we would hope that there's ways that we can incorporate some of these measures.
Thanks for the question, Carol. So the downtown redevelopment project, we did file a environmental impact report with the MEPA office. One of those sections deals with stormwater flows. And as I think a lot of you folks know, a big component of stormwater in downtown was the Town Brook project. And what we discovered was countless number of tie-ins of stormwater systems throughout the entire run of the Town Brook. When we relocated it to its current location, we had to reconnect a lot of those tie-ins. One of the projects that a lot of you probably don't know of that we're working on right now is the discontinuance of the old alignment. And in order to do that, we need to construct new stormwater piping and infrastructure that will then carry that flow down to the new alignment of the Town Brook. So that design, which we're currently looking at alternatives analysis right now on where these things are going to be located, where the infrastructure is going to be, and that's based off of new buildings coming online. But we will have to account for the appropriate flooding in the 50 and the 100-year flood in the new infrastructure that will go in downtown.
So how does that affect the development? Are we going to have to adhere, or are we going to put any regulations in place or zoning in place that?
Well, it's not a zoning or a regulation thing. It's simple. It's a public infrastructure system. It's our stormwater system. We convey it through culverts here in the city.
But when the builders build, I mean, I saw the building here that would allow for the first floor to be inundated for. I mean, I don't know where our levels are, like the downtown isn't in a flood, but us along the coast will flood.
Correct, and that's part of the
We're talking about
mapping.
climate change and.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do now. I think that unfortunately, we didn't catch the timing right in terms of this project with what's happening in downtown yet. But what we're trying to do is look at exactly what are those vulnerabilities, make sure that we have a full understanding of, is the floodplain area correct? And what are we looking at for increased precipitation? And then what could we do in zoning or regulation base? And also what could be done in building design guidelines. It's not going to happen within a short period of time. Those kinds of recommendations are going to take a little bit of time for us to get into place. But what we could do is say, here's what we're looking at, and depending upon when those developments start to occur, I don't know the time frame, but that's the aim.
It doesn't make sense to build a downtown unless you take these things into consideration.
Well, we are taking those into consideration, and we do have design guidelines for the downtown district. That does include green and sustainable development guidelines, but that's more on the building specifics. I think you started out talking stormwater in general. That's a completely different topic.
But I think at the beginning of this talk, I wrote it down, I don't want to go through my notes, but didn't you say, was it 3 to 6 feet or 3 to 5 feet in 50 years that we're going up with?
For coastal sea level rise inundation.
So did you say 3 to 6 feet?
It could be, anywhere between, I think, 1 foot and 6 feet over the next 100 years.
So that's going to affect the downtown, correct?
It quite possibly could, yes.
Right, so.
Unless we take actions, but we
floors
fortify.
that are going to be able to flood.
Let me answer you in this question. We've heard from my job with the city, we've heard from a number of engineers. We have a number of peer review engineers that review our planning board cases. We've also heard from a number of architects. And what we're hearing from those professions is there's, architects are starting, through the building code, are already designing systems, your elevator motor, put it on the roof, not in the basement. Simple switches like that, they were already incorporated. It's our hope through this initiative over the next 12 months that we're going to target some specific industry folks, and I think that is a worthy group that we plan to target. So
my question is, Rob, is it going to happen with the buildings that are about to be built?
Well, we reviewed it for the West of Chestnut buildings, yes.
No, no.
So they're going to have a first floor that can flood?
No.
What's the
Everything's been approved based on the current FEMA maps, based on the current flood.
Well, we're talking about the future.
Yeah, but what he's saying is it's all been approved based on the existing regulations.
But
So,
homeowners are expected to be based on the future. Based on now, I mean, why would a developer not have to know what they're doing on the future?
They're not in the flood zone right now.
For that would be, why would a banker finance a development that would put itself at risk? So it was reviewed, there was no significant impact due to sea level rise due to those two buildings. Most of the stormwater in
We're
downtown.
talking 6 feet, there is going to be an
Yeah, that's a different discussion. And that's a regional discussion too.
That's
I mean, one of the
important
ideas that has been floated out is putting tide gates out in Boston Harbor, to try to hold back, go to the Venice style. I don't think that'll ever happen, but, we're starting the discussion.
The timing, I guess I would just say, we're hearing you loud and clear. I think it's just the timing in terms of when a development project has come in for its permitting versus what are we trying to come up with now. One thing I will say is that just to give you a sense of this timing, just recently, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, where we, as a regional agency, and this is what Rob said, MEPA, we have the opportunity to review these types of larger developments. Only as of last month did they put forward a climate adaptation, climate resiliency policy, where we will have to incorporate some of these elements in the review. It's not even mandated yet in state law, in some of, Mass Wetlands Protection Act, and other laws. So we're trying to get there. We're really jumping at these chances. And I think it's encouraging to hear from Rob saying that at least the developers themselves, when they are coming in, and yet in the absence of these regulations, are already thinking forward. They're already making some recommendations about, like Rob said, let's put some of the infrastructure on top of the building so that it does not get flooded in the basement. That's going to be a free flowing area. They're thinking about it, and I think, Rob, it sounds like that might be a possibility, depending on what that permitting wants. But we're getting to that. We're moving towards that. Does that make sense? The timing is slightly off. We're sort of trying to get to where we need to be, even though development's still happening.
How does the city, if it isn't regulations, how does the city guide a developer to do the right thing?
There's no tools right now at our disposal.
So what would be the tools?
Change the ordinance. So to be zoning or, the state building code is actually coming in and pushing that issue.
Make more laws.
On the built environment.
Yes, there's state and local, there needs to be changes at both state and local.
You mean
The
make more laws?
state building code is one that that is being reviewed actually right now to ensure that there is an opportunity for these types of changes.
So we as citizens, how do we affect that?
Where's Martin?
Right to representatives, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, you need to write to your local representatives and talk about how this is important to you. And I also would encourage, like, for example, you can communicate with us. We then work with our state partners. We know for a fact, for example, that the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management staff are really trying to talk directly to, I forget which agency is really reviewing the state building code. I don't know if you know, Martin, but that we need to push them. We need to voice that opinion as best as we can when these opportunities arise. So that's what I would say. I know you have had your hand up for a bit.
So talking about existing regulations, my question is, what is the level of LEED certification that the city of Quincy will require these buildings to have?
Right now, the city does not have any LEED certification requirements. In the downtown, we had hoped to achieve LEED silver in the neighborhood district level. I know that's the entry level, but in our downtown design guidelines, a few years back, the planning board brought on what we call the green subcommittee to work on an addendum to the guidelines that included a lot of the sustainable development principles. And in fact, we can view projects just in the downtown again based off of those guidelines. And that, generally gets you about the LEED ND, LEED silver. Absolutely. It's our hope that the building community, the private developers, as a marketing tool would want their buildings to achieve LEED certification.
So just a question about process. When the city puts out an RFP, do you write in there it needs to be its LEED silver, or, again, I'm trying to figure out what can the city do to push these people?
Right, in our urban plan, it does talk about, the desire to achieve LEED certification, but by no means does it stick it on them to achieve that.
Okay, how do we get them to have to?
Right. Yeah, again, it would be to take a look at the zoning ordinances.
Make more laws.
Didn't we just do that? Didn't we just
We recodified the city ordinance. I would call that more of a house cleaning effort to try to account for all of the amendments for the past 20 years in the zoning code. So it was updated.
Build 20-story building.
Yeah, that was by special permit, yeah.
So I don't understand that part, but we're going to pick up some of these kind of things.
Well, in the downtown, like I said, it is considered. The rest of the city, it's not.
But will.
I mean, that would be an example of a recommendation that comes out of this planning effort at the end of the year. It is recommended that the city pursue adopting LEED certification guidelines. So that's what this feedback is for. We wanted to start the discussion and see what's important for folks.
It's interesting to know that there's initiative to LEED that Quincy is doing, but it seems like LEED's been around forever, and it's understandable, builders understand it, people understand it, there's education already around it. It just seems like, why try to reinvent the wheel?
Well, it's one avenue. There's actually, even in LEED, there's a lot of additional measures, site level, not just building, that we're trying to, put forth, but you're right. I think that actually what I've heard is that the U.S. Green Building Council is actually looking at their LEED certification now, again, to think about more energy efficiency measures even that they already had. So there are some recognition of the climate resiliency piece.
Because that's the kind of stuff too that raises our property values. I mean,
Right.
Everything downtown is up to a certain standard that will.
Right. I think I'm really glad that I'm hearing from you now. I am really appreciative that folks are, have been willing to talk. One of the things I should note is we don't want to keep you here all night. I think it's maybe 8 o'clock, and we were going to close out the program, but we're more than happy to stay and talk with you. And I also want to encourage you very much. We need to hear from you during this process. We are going to have a web page. We're going to have other ways for you to continuously be engaged. The web page is a specific site for this project where you can add your information. You can add, contact us through that. There's a survey that BU has put together that we want you to fill out. We really need to hear from you. We need to hear these observations from you. So please do keep looking for that. And when we have our next meetings, please do attend, because this is not the last chance that you'll have to talk. So I guess I'll kind of close it with that.
Just one quick, 2 seconds.
Sure, but also, I can't see your name, but you would...
James, yeah, no, it was a LEED comment. I don't know if anyone else here is a LEED accredited professional, taking the exams and stuff, but most of the LEED certifications have been absorbed into the new stretch codes and energy codes and building codes. One of the problems with LEED is, in order to get LEED certification, you got to pay 30 grand to the U.S. Green Building Council to get the sticker. It's not really as an architect, as somebody who's done LEED projects, it's a red herring. We need to look at other energy efficiency standards. It's basically become a way for the U.S. Green Building Council to make money off of projects and to line their own pockets.
Okay, so, yes.
2 seconds. I just want to say, I know you said today was Earth Day, correct?
Yes.
I just want to make everybody aware, I just happened to walk by the barrel and we're mixing plastic and paper and everything together. I just thought I'd make you aware of that.
We'll take care of that.
Thank you.
And on that note, I guess I should also, yes, Karen. Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Who you funded by, and what exactly, how long you been in business?
We're a regional planning agency. We've been in business for over 50 years. And we receive direct funding from assessment, if you will, from every community that we serve. So it's per population, per person amount that the municipality is paying to for our service. And then we do also get some state funding.
And federal and foundation.
Federal and foundation, we're here to serve you. So also, folks, there's a couple of sort of prizes because it's Earth Day on the way out. Please take a seed packet. It's something that will create resiliency in your own yards. And also, there's a really great homeowners resiliency sort of prepared weatherization booklet. And thank you again for coming.